Hey, I'm Nick Kalikas. Welcome to the show where you get first look at the latest odds before they hit the sports books.
And I'm Miguel.
This is the place for a unique look at MMA from a gambler's perspective.
And this is MMA Oddsbreaker. Welcome to the show. I'm Nick Kalikas alongside Miguel.
On today's show, we're going to look back at this past weekend's UFC 143, take a look at how that show went down.
And on today's Oddsbreaker segment, I'll be joined by Damon Martin from MMAweekly.com and my good friend Frank Trigg. Both guys will help me break 3 original fight odds that have not hit the sportsbooks yet.
Before we get into the MMA news, Nick, yesterday was the Super Bowl. How'd you do?
Man, I was on the Patriots. How'd you do?
Hey, I'm from New York, so I'm happy.
So you made money and I lost money?
Probably.
Well, it was a good game, though, and as a regular fan, casual fan, I liked that the Giants won the game. I think that Eli Manning kind of deserves it. Tom Brady's won enough Super Bowls, so good to see the Manning brothers get another Super Bowl under their belt, and the Giants fans get a win. I'm jealous. I'm a Bengals fan, man. It's going to be a while before I see the Super Bowl ring, I think.
Well, it was a great game, so I think everybody wins in that respect, and I think we can all agree that Madonna is starting to age into Joan Rivers. Yeah,
a lot of crazy comments back and forth about the halftime show, so maybe next year we get a little better, I guess.
Enough Super Bowl talk, though. Let's get into it. UFC 143 this past weekend, big fight, welterweight interim world title fight between Carlos Condit and Nick Diaz. A little bit of controversy. Maybe I don't agree, but a little bit of controversy out there. What you see?
It was a controversial decision, and honestly, I think it could have been scored either way, 48-47. I wouldn't have been shocked if it was scored either way. I was expecting them to probably say Diaz's name at the end, because I gave the first 2 rounds to Diaz, and then I scored round 3 and 4 to Condit, and then that 5th round was really up for grabs. I had Condit winning it before that last little scramble and takedown, and he took his back. I think that might have been enough to steal the round for Diaz, but again, I wasn't shocked. It could have went either way, and I don't think you could score that fight wrong as long as it was close.
It was a very close fight. It makes it very difficult for the judges. You know, both fighters obviously thought they were winning the fight as things go on, so I don't quite trust their judgment when you're looking at it. For me, what I noticed was that towards the end of the fights, the championship rounds 4 and 5, Condit seemed to have a little bit more gas, a little bit more condition, and that's not supposed to happen with Nick Diaz. That's supposed to be Nick's strength. So I give Carlos a lot of credit. I think he definitely established himself as the #1 guy at welterweight, and George St. Pierre is going to come back to a very tough fight.
Yeah, and Nick Diaz, I hope he doesn't retire. I know he mentioned retirement in the ring, and I can guarantee almost that it's emotion more than anything, because he's such a great fighter, and I hate to see him really hang it up. I doubt he does that. And there's still plenty of fights for him out there. I mean, he's one of the best fighters in the welterweight division, the most exciting fighters to watch. So his stock, I don't see it ever basically going down unless he starts having lackluster fights and losing. You know, I mean, he keeps winning and fighting the way he does, he'll always have fans.
It's hard because I agree with everything you said. He's a spectacular fighter. He brings an energy and an angst to his fights that other people just don't bring. But we do know that he also marches, to the beat of his own drum. So when he says he's retired, I'm going to wait for him to tell me he's coming back before I don't believe him, because he does his own thing.
Okay, and as a quick side note, I did open up the GSP Condit future fight line, and I opened up GSP probably a little lower than I would have normally because of the injury, the surgery, the time off. He opened up around 315, the line's up to around 350. It might hit up to 400, but I guarantee we'll see a lot of Condit action come back on fight day, so I think that line will bounce back down a little bit. I do think GSP beats Condit, so I think that he can avoid most of what Condit has to offer as far as, on the feet, and because he'll take this fight to the ground and probably avoid the subs. So it's probably GSP's fight to lose here. Give me your quick thoughts on GSP versus Condit.
I think the old GSP beats Condit. I don't know what we're going to have when he comes back, so it'll be a very interesting thing to see. I think the UFC may be making a mistake here. If GSP's rehab extends itself to the end of the year, they really need to put Condit back in the ring before the GSP fight. And that's just out of respect to Condit. He's in his prime. He's 28. He's established. Get him another fight. We don't have to sit around and wait 8 or 9 months to see Carlos Condit again, although the GSP fight, is very intriguing.
Yeah, and we could see that happen. Condit could very well get another fight in between somewhere. But let's go ahead and move on. The other big fight was Nelson and Verdum. Verdum won impressively. He beat a very game Nelson. Not a big shocker. To me, it was kind of a toss-up fight the whole way, but Verdum did look pretty good, and he deserved that decision.
He clearly deserved the decision. Roy Nelson's been around for a long time. I personally am a big Roy Nelson fan. Followed him from his grappling days into his MMA career. Actually, have signed him for a couple of times to my organizations to have fights. I'm a big Roy Nelson fan, but I'm afraid that he's topped off. He has not been able to break through and beat a top guy, and Verdum established himself again here as a top guy. Cleaned up that loss that he took in his last fight with Overing.
Yeah, we're not sure exactly where Nelson goes from here, but hopefully he gets another few more fights in the UFC, and they don't let him go yet. I'd like to actually see him try to drop down to 205 and maybe be competitive in that weight class. We shall see. The next, we have to say honorable mention, at least for Henenbaro and Koscheck and Herman for getting the wins on the pay-per-view card as well. All of them were impressive. Koscheck in a tight fight against Pierce. That fight seemed like it could go either way. Herman was very impressive against a very game Starks, a good wrestler. We've seen Herman on the roll now. He's won a few fights since he came back from injury, and I think he's basically the best Ed Herman we've seen yet. And I think he's going to continue to get that confidence and win some fights. And then Henenbaro, you know how I feel about this guy. Off camera, I said that this guy's the next guy in line to possibly contend with Dominic Cruz. So he'll probably eventually get the winner of Faber Cruz when they do meet again. And if he gets that cardio in check, I think he'll have a really good chance of stealing that belt away from Cruz. I know that's a lot to say, but that cardio does worry me. And if he can't go full 5 strong, then Dominic Cruz probably wins. But that's down the road if we even see that fight take place. But solid card overall.
Yep, a great card, and I think actually, all the guys that won the fights deserve, a big round of applause. Pierce, though, I think Pierce, even though in losing, I think he made a name for himself. I think he fought a really tough guy, and he showed that he belongs in the neighborhood. Yeah,
Pierce is not going to be an easy out for anybody at 170, that's for sure. All right, time to get rolling with our Oddsbreaker segment. Let me introduce both of our guests today. First is our guest, the host of MMA Weekly Radio, Damon Martin. Damon, welcome back to the Oddsbreaker Show.
Thanks for having me, as always.
And our second guest today on the Oddsbreaker segment is my good friend Frank Trigg. Frank, thanks for helping me out today and being on the show.
Of course, always there for you, bud. No worries.
All right, guys, you guys are both familiar how the show works, but for those who are not, our sponsored sportsbook, BetDSI.com, has donated a $5,000 bankroll to both Damon and Frank, and they could bet $500 either on the favorite or the underdog. I've selected 3 fights today. We're going to get started first. UFC 145, the main event's going to be Jones versus Evans. Takes place in Atlanta, Georgia, but we're going to go on to another featured fight from that card. It's going to be a bantamweight scrap. Miguel Torres versus Michael McDonald. We're going to start off with Damon Martin first. Damon, I'm going to open the line minus 205 for Miguel Torres. The comeback's going to be plus 155 on Michael McDonald. What are your thoughts and what are your bet?
Give me Michael McDonald all day in this fight. The kid is really a star. I think he's going to be the future in the bantamweight division. He's really aggressive on his feet, dominant striking, dynamic striking at that. And the new Miguel Torres scares me a little bit. I mean, Miguel has kind of gotten in his own head a little bit, training with Faraz Zahabi. I think he's going to eventually mold himself into a better fighter because of that. I just don't think he's there right now. His last few fights, he's been more tentative. He's lost some of his aggression, and I know that aggression got him in trouble in fights like Brian Bowles. But I just think it's gone away so far from what Miguel was as a fighter that it's almost confusing him a little bit. So I like Michael McDonald in this fight. I'll take him as the underdog all day long.
All right, Damon, very confident sounding in Michael McDonald. You're going to take the underdog plus 155. It's going to be 500 to win 775. Let's throw it over to Frank Trigg. Frank, what are your thoughts on this fight?
Man, I couldn't disagree more with Damon on this one. I do agree that McDonald is a good fighter, that he will be the future of the bantamweight, but he's just not a guy that's going to be able to beat Miguel, especially after Miguel being fired, finally coming back. He's got a point to prove that he needs to be in this bantamweight. He's got a point to prove that he has improved his style technique by staying up to the TriStar and getting his stuff together, not only mentally but also physically. And really, if you look at the records, Miguel's history is just so much stronger. He's had so many more fights. Both guys at about a 60% submission rate when it comes to the fights. But to be honest with you, Miguel just submits cleaner. He submits better. He's got more technique when he does it. He's a lot more violent, even when he's from his back. A lot of guys are going to be like, oh, well, McDonald's going to take Miguel down. And most guys are going to go, oh, look, Miguel's going to be on his back, and then the whole fight's really going to start at that point. The problem is, once you put Miguel on his back, he throws vicious elbows from his back. He knows how to back fist from his back. He's got a style that when we trained together, he kept me away from him, despite almost going berserk from his back. And in the middle of it, he's looking for submissions the whole time. I'm leaving this one alone because I don't think there's going to be enough money in the world for me to lay down on Miguel and make any kind of money on it. And I just don't think McDonald's got the style right now to beat Torres. It's just not going to happen.
Okay, so your take would be on the show, Miguel Torres, 1,025 to win 500, sounds like, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so you guys split on this fight, and I think the public's going to pretty much be split too, but we'll see how this unfolds here in April. Okay, moving on to our second fight. It's a title contender eliminator between Jim Miller and Nate Diaz. Now, this takes place at the huge event on UFC on Fox 3. And we're going to start off with Frank Trigg on this one. Competitive line here, but Jim Miller is coming in as a decent favorite, minus 235. The comeback on Nate Diaz, plus 175. Give me your thoughts and give me your bet.
Yeah, really, I'm looking my way down to Miller on this one, simply because both guys, you know, if they ever lose, it's usually by decision. You can't knock these guys out. You can't really submit these guys. These guys are going to beat them. It's got to be by submission. But really, with Diaz's style against Miller, he just doesn't have that tenacity like his older brother does. He just doesn't have that ability to push the pace the entire time and really pump you out of it. Now, don't get me wrong. Diaz is a great fighter. He's got amazing ability, and he's really, really good at the whole overall MMA game. But he's just lacking a little bit of something when it comes out there. Miller's really on a big push right now. He's really trying to prove that he can make beer on one side and still go out there and be able to kick somebody's butt on the other side. And that's kind of what Miller's been trying to do. And really with Miller, he's got the better stand-up. He throws a lot more punches than Diaz does when he's standing up, and he throws a lot more leg kicks. Not to mention he moves his feet a lot more, but he also knows how to throw with power. That's the problem Diaz brothers just don't have. They throw a lot of punches, but never really with power. As soon as he does connect with you, it's irritating, but Miller's got that kind of power that may not knock you out, but it's going to put you a little loopy and make you fall down to the ground and they'll get a submission on you. I'm really taking Miller in this one just because he's just a better overall fighter at this point.
Okay, so Frank Trigg is going to lay the juice on Jim Miller. The price is going to be $11.75 to win $500. Let's throw it over to Damon. Damon, you agree or disagree with Frank Trigg on Jim Miller?
I definitely agree with Frank on this one. I mean, listen, you know, Nate Diaz boxing, you know, the Diaz brothers boxing is phenomenal. They got a great jab. They have the ability to get in your face. Unfortunately, with Nate's style, it's come back to bite it when he's fought great wrestlers in the past as well. I mean, when he was at lightweight before, you know, that was the nightmare situation he ran into. And with Jim Miller, I think Jim is, you know, much more disciplined in the way he wrestles than even a guy like Clay Guida, who he fought, who is a little crazier in his takedowns, a little crazier in his style. But Jim Miller's very disciplined. He's not going to get baited into Nate Diaz's fight. You know, he's going to take him to the ground, and if it stays standing, he's smart enough to, you know, do what Carlos Condit did against his brother Nick. You know, don't get it caught against the cage with Nate just kind of pitter-pattering you with those shots. He'll get out of there, and I think it's really going to be a takedown clinic for Jim Miller because he's a phenomenal wrestler, and that's kind of been the nightmare for Nate Diaz when he was a lightweight before. He just struggled against really high-level wrestlers, and I don't think it's any different here.
Okay, so you're also going to lay the juice, $11.75 to win $500 on Jim Miller, minus 235. You guys both agree on this fight. Again, another one I'm interested to see where the public's going to go because Nate Diaz has had a tremendous amount of betting support lately, so we'll have to find out here shortly. Okay, sticking to the UFC on Fox 3 card, it's a heavyweight battle in our third fight for the Oddsbreaker segment between Pat Barry and Lavar Johnson. Let's start off with Damon again first on this one. Damon, I'm going to open up Pat Barry, minus 245. The comeback on Big Lavar Johnson is going to be plus 185. Give me your thoughts and give me your bet.
I like Pat Barry in this fight. Listen, Lavar Johnson packs a serious punch. He's got some serious power, and he showed that against Joey Beltran. The difference is Joey Beltran is very much a brawler. He likes to get in there and get in these crazy scraps. Pat Barry's a much more disciplined fighter. Pat Barry has nasty leg kicks. He can chop down Lavar Johnson from the outside. And you know, outside of that Czech Congo fight where really he just got caught, you know, Pat Barry has looked a lot better in the stand-up than pretty much every opponent he's faced. I look at Lavar Johnson as a big, heavy puncher. I look at Pat Barry as a legit kickboxer who will throw kicks, he'll throw punches. He's got a lot of power, and Pat Barry's also pretty quick for a heavyweight. He's got, you know, good footwork, quick movement. He's not going to get caught against the cage with Lavar Johnson just unloading those big, heavy shots like Joey Beltran did. I like Lavar Johnson. He's a good, you know, good fighter, but I just don't like this matchup for him. I like Pat Barry to come out and probably score a first-round knockout.
Okay, so Damon Martin laying the juice here. Pat Barry, minus 245. It's going to be $12.25 to win $500. Another difficult fight to predict here. Let's throw it over to Frank Trigg. Frank, what do you think about this fight?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Damon on this one. I think Pat Barry's evolved a little bit more as an MMA fighter. He's got the worst of the two records. He's only 7-4, but he's really got the better experience when it comes to other guys who can stand in front of you and bang. Pat's not going to stand right in the pocket, but Lavar will. Lavar's got a lot of KOs and TKOs, There's a lot of guys who want to stay in front of him at heavyweight. Pepper's a lot smarter. He needs a lot more leg kicks, get himself out of the way, and when he gets towards the cage, he's going to make sure that he's pressing the action against the cage. And that's really where you start winning the judges' minds. In the heavyweight division, if you lose in the first round, it's really hard to come back and steal the second round and then win the third round and get the victory. So if Pat wins the first round, Lavar's going to be in a desperate situation. He's going to really have to start swinging for the fences while he's standing still. And that's Pat's best attribute. When guys are standing still throwing big haymakers, he knows to step just to the outside, throw a leg kick on the way in, and come back with a big overhand right. I think really Pat's going to get the knockout sometime either late in the first or early in the second on this one. Pat's just too tough and too strong.
Okay, so again, you agree with Damon Martin on this fight. You're going to lay the juice on Pat Barry, minus 245. It's going to be $12.25 to win $500. Both of you guys made a lot of valid points why Pat Barry probably wins this fight, and we'll see what the public does with this line. Okay, guys, this is the part of the show. I let you guys plug your websites or anything you want to talk about here. So let's throw it over to Damon first. Damon, anything you'd like to say before we let you go?
Thanks as always for having me on. Obviously, check out MMA Weekly Radio every day around 3 o'clock. Got lots of stuff coming up with UFC on Fuel and UFC 144. And check me out on Twitter, @Damon Martin.
All right, Frank, what about you? Anything you'd like to say before we go?
So follow me up on Twitter. It's @Frank Trigg. And check out my iPhone Android app that released about a month ago. It's just Frank Trigg MMA. There's some quick little stuff on there. You can catch training videos and some cookbooks. And if you look in there, one of the earlier videos actually gets to see me get tasered by a bunch of cops in Toronto. So it's not a bad little bit. That's the Frank Trigg MMA app on for Android and for iPhone.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Tremendous job on the show today, and look forward to having you back on.
Another great Oddsbreaker segments where our two special guests broke down 3 spectacular fights with Nick here. We're going to take a look at their bets a little bit later, but first I'm going to have Nick tell you a little bit about line movement.
Just like when the line's first released at the sports books, you tend to see a little bit more movement when the line gets hit, when action comes in. So we're going to do that same kind of philosophy here, and we're going to adjust the fights that I've selected today. Now, both guys came in and wagered $500 on either the favorite or the underdog. So the first fight we selected was an awesome bantamweight battle between Miguel Torres and Michael McDonald. Now, I opened a line 2-1 basically for Miguel Torres. The guys actually split on this fight, so I'm not going to adjust the line. It's going to hit the sports books at minus 205. The comeback's going to be plus 155 on Michael McDonald. And I have a tendency to think a lot of people will respect Miguel Torres maybe a little bit more in this fight, but a lot of people are going to be interested in that dog money. So we could see some two-way action. What are your thoughts?
It's a great fight. It's a really hard fight for me to pick. I like the kid McDonald because the bottom line with these guys are, I think he may be one of the first ones that we see here. These are guys that grew up with this as their sport. They're not crossing over from wrestling or from some other martial art, boxing or whatever it is. They're not coming over from an athletic background or something like that. They've been doing MMA since they were little kids. And he's the first guy there. He's got a great record. Torres has a wealth of experience. He's been doing it for a real long time. My tendency is to pick Torres. I think there's a jump in the quality of opponent for McDonald that Torres should be able to exploit. The other part with Torres is I think he has to feel the pressure. He was recently released by the UFC and bought back, and if that isn't a wake-up call, I don't know what is.
Very good points to make, too. And I do think it's a big step up in competition for Michael McDonald, although he's battled some tough guys. I'm not saying he hasn't, but this is a step up. If he wins this fight, which is a big if, because Miguel Torres is going to be game, he'll definitely make some waves and probably set himself up for a title shot soon down the road. All right, the second fight we're going to adjust today is a lightweight scrap between Nate Diaz and Jim Miller. Man, am I excited for this fight. Should be a great one. Both of the guys came in, and they did bet Miller at minus 235, which I'm a little surprised. Nate Diaz has been on a roll lately, but I understand that they've gave a lot of valid points why they're choosing Jim Miller in this fight. What do you think?
It's a great fight, a very tough fight to call. The thing I like about Miller is Miller's a winner. His record shows it, his career shows it. I think he's efficient, and I think that could be one of the bugaboos around Nick and Nate's style, that Nate fights aggressive, and you kind of got to beat him up. He doesn't feel he's losing the fight unless he's actually really hurt, whereas you can be losing the fight. And that is something that's tricky because Nate has not really changed his style. He always fights the same aggressive style. We'll see if he's got something, to pressure Miller with throughout this fight. But my tendency would be to pick Miller in this one.
Well, the guys both came in on Jim Miller. I know Nate Diaz gets a ton of respect, especially after his Cowboy Cerrone win. So actually, based off that win, you got to tighten up the line a little bit. That's why I opened it at 235 and not higher. But since both guys did come in at 235, I do have to adjust this line. I'm going to go at minus 250. So it's going to hit the books at minus 250, come back plus 190, because I do think that Miller can probably avoid most of the damage that Diaz can offer, even the subs, and probably control and win the decision. So Jim Miller is going to open up 2.5 to 1. All right, another fight from the UFC on Fox 3 card. This time it's the big boys. A lot of people like to see heavyweight stand and bag, and that's exactly what they're going to get in this fight between Pat Barry and Lavar Johnson. I opened Barry as the favorite, minus 245. I do think he should have a great striking advantage in this fight, but Lavar Johnson has a lot of power, and power is always dangerous. So I don't want to get too crazy and make Pat Barry a huge favorite, and I'm going to be curious to see what the public does with this line as well. But Barry is opening up 245. They both took him. I'm going to move it to minus 260. So it's going to be minus 260, plus 200 is going to be the comeback when it does hit the books, and we'll get Miguel's thoughts.
Another great fight. I love the big boys when they come in to bang. Both of these guys are, reputed to be big bangers, and rightfully so. I think we will see a big banging fight. However, I want to lay out a challenge to Pat Barry. He's coming off a win. Pat, he was talking about, he's going to do a single leg or a double leg, take somebody down and do a submission. I think this might be a chance for you to do that. Lavar has been subbed in some of his fights. His groundwork isn't his strong point. And if you're going to do it, Pat, bottom line is show me, don't tell me.
Oh, there you go. Good points there, too. So Pat Barry versus Lavar Johnson, UFC on Fox 3.
And now it's time for our mailbag segment here at MMA Oddsbreakers. Every week, we reach into our mailbag and take a question from one of our followers. If you have a question for Nick or I about MMA or about the odds that you see us break right here on the show, go ahead and shoot us an email. If we take your question and read it on the air, you'll get a free gift if you include your address, so be sure to get those questions to us. This week's question comes to us from JJ from Sacramento, California. JJ was disappointed by the UFC on Fox 2 show, thought it was a little boring, and wants to know if there are any repercussions in the Fox contract heading UFC's way. It's an interesting question. It's a business question. I don't think there are any repercussions like, their contract's going to be canceled or anything like that. I don't think that's the case. I think we all have a lesson to learn here, maybe even UFC included and stuff, and that you can't always count on fights that are on paper that look spectacular to come through on TV. They've had 4 fights on Fox. The fact that none of them have been super highlight reel is to be expected. And the contract, 7 years. They have 6 more shows to deliver this year. Let's just sit back and watch. I'm sure at some point we're all going to be thrilled.
Yeah, it's basically hit or miss. It's really hard to find that good mix of blending a card together to see what you're going to get. But they're trying definitely on UFC on Fox 3. They got a great lightweight battle for the headliner, and then they also added a fight like Lavar Johnson and Pat Barry, which we covered earlier on the show. I mean, that fight's going to end in knockout. So they're trying to get some knockout-type fights on there. But at the same time, I think they're doing a great job by showcasing a true MMA fight, which is what Nate Diaz and Jim Miller is going to be. It's going to be a true MMA fight.
And it's a true testament to how the sport's been evolving over the years. The UFC basically is doing about 3 shows a month now. There's a lot of fights. Hey, you go to a full season of baseball games, you're going to catch a couple of boring games, a couple of games that you think are going to be knockout because of the pitchers or whatever, and it just doesn't work out that way. So let's sit back. We're on Fox. We're on the major network. It's the biggest thing going in the sport, and I'm looking forward to UFC on Fox 3. Well, that's it for another episode of MMA Oddsbreakers. I want to thank our special guests on the Oddsbreaker segment, Frank Trigg and Damon Martin. Great job as always, guys. Thanks for joining us. And you can look for the odds that Nick broke right here on the show to start popping up at the sportsbook throughout the week.
And for all the latest updates on the MMA Oddsbreaker show, make sure you check out our Twitter page at MMA Oddsbreaker. For Miguel Iturrate, I'm Nick Kalika saying until next time, enjoy the fights.